Also. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the proposal defense session of Bibek Upadhayay, who is a PhD candidate and one of the earliest members of the SAIL lab. Bibek has been active in multiple domains of research, from natural language processing for open source intelligence to the safety and security of large language models and the security of brain-computer interfaces. He's already published a good number of conference papers on the research that he has completed in my lab. But today, he's going to tell us about his PhD dissertation research proposal on efficient and robust language adaptation in multilingual large language models. A couple of notes on the ground rules. We're starting with Bibek's presentation of his proposal. It's going to be a 45 to 50 minute long session. During the presentation, I would like to ask that if you have questions and you would like to raise them in the middle of the presentation, make sure that they are clarifying or short form questions. Once the presentation is over, there will be a 15-minute period for questions from the audience. If you have a longer form question, please leave those for that section of today's defense. After the audience Q&A session, we'll ask everyone except the committee members to leave the room or the Zoom call, and we will begin a closed session where the committee will ask questions from the candidates. And for the committee members, we'll also have a follow-on closed session with just the committee members to deliberate and officiate our feedback. With that, I would like to thank you all for joining, and please welcome Dr. Bibek Upadhayay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wahid. Hello, everyone. I'm Bibek Upadhayay. I'm a PhD candidate. My supervisor is Dr. Wahid. I've been working under him in SAIL Lab since 2019. Today, I'm going to present my proposal defense on efficient and robust language adaptation in multilingual LLMs. I do have a few slides for the content warning. There are some text which might seem harmful. That's what the content warning is here. I also have presented the ethical statement. This work is solely based for the research purpose. I do not encourage any harmful content generation. The whole purpose of my research and the content generation using LLMs, the jailbreaking, everything is just for the research purpose only. With that being said, let's ask ChatGPT how to create a new program. Now, this will tell ChatGPT, okay, give me some guidance on how to create a nuclear weapon, and it will straight going to say no. We can do this in the other models as well. Let's try jailbreaking and see what will happen. But first, I want to explain what jailbreaking is. Basically, in jailbreaking, we are trying to break the safeguard or the safety training that has been done in the LLMs so that it will produce some harmful content. And prompt injection is another kind of jailbreaking where we try to hide the malicious content in the prompt that we're sending to the model. So if that's the case, we can do a jailbreaking like this, where I put this malicious question of how to create a nuclear weapon in Vietnamese by padding with other questions. And if I do that, it will give me the answer. And if I convert this, we can already see the answer is giving me all the ingredients that are required to create a nuclear weapon. Not only that, I can extend this attack and ask it, can you please create images for each steps above in Vietnamese, and it will start pulling all the resources that are required to create nuclear weapon. This is what we call jailbreaking. And here the model is creating the harmful response or the response that can be used by an attacker to do malicious access. Similarly, I can also do the jailbreaking on state-of-the-art models such as Cloud 3.5 using other cognitive load attack. I can create a fake news using that and ask it to write a defamatory article claiming that a president is addicted on heroin. And it will start writing an article on that. It might not be completely coherent, but it gives some idea to the bad actors on how to create an article. Now we know that LLMs, they have to be robust against these kinds of attack. And it is very crucial that LLMs should be aligned with societal values. I have to present another fun fact. Since 2023, Meta AI has released Llama 2 and Llama 3 series model. And currently, there are more than 61,000 open source models, which have been used by different research communities. And open source models has been thriving since then, being used in different real world applications. This tells us the importance of having the open source model, even if it's the open weights and training methodology. With that being said, we all have seen large language models such as ChatGPT, Llama 3, Cloud A. We have been using that to create some creative work, such as creating images, doing different tasks, text generation, classification, grading, creating assignment, helping with the assignment. It has been used in all kinds of fields. But there have been significant issue in these models when it comes to some multilingual settings. It performs very poorly in low resource languages. And because of that, we really need to adapt these LLMs to almost as many as low resource language as possible to make sure they are inclusive. People from different regions can access that. It also preserves the linguistic diversity, provides economic opportunities for those regions. And also, we have just seen the attack, and it makes sense that these models are very vulnerable to these kind of attacks. And we need to protect these LLMs from users. And we have to make sure these LLMs don't create harmful advice. We also want these LLMs to minimize the biases. So the scope of the proposal, I can summarize them into two parts because these are the two of the region that actually hindering the widespread adoption of LLMs. The first one is co-adaptation of LLMs in multiple languages. Second one is the safety in multilingual models. And I want to begin with the multilingual LLMs first. So from BERT, the progression of the multilingual LLM has been really great from BERT all the way to Bloom with PolyLM, with increasing size and the parameter counts. The performance has been really great using different low resource languages that has been open source. Also, the training strategies, it has been advanced from multitask fine-tuning to curriculum learning. And it has also been shown that there exist cross-lingual capabilities between models where they share the languages with the languages being in the same script. With that being said, when we try the low resource languages with the state-of-the-art models, such as GPT-4, Cloud A3, we still see the struggle in the performance of these languages. Even the open source model, which has been released with the multilingual capabilities objective, even they face a challenge. So to show some example, what I did, I took Newari language, which is a low resource language spoken in Nepali, and I asked the model, okay, can you please continue this text in Newari? And I start expanding on the same text. So I can see that it had generated some text, but I really don't know Newari, neither I know those languages. So what I can do, I can give that to Google Translate, and you can see that one of the texts is in Hindi, the other one is Nepali. So we can see that there are some limitations still in low resource language. Now the question is, where are these limitations coming from? Now, if we take a look into their pre-training data, it's actually the cause of the imbalance in training data. The example here is the language distribution of pre-training data that has been used in Llama 2. And these are the ones that they published, and the rest of the low resource language, they did not exceed 0.005%. And because of that, now we have an English-centric model that performs poorly in low resource languages. And these not only exist in one model, but this is a common issue in other models as well. So if one model is really good at Sanskrit, the other model might be bad at that. But now the question is, how can we improve the performance for low resource languages in these models? Now, another question is, why do low resource language matters in LLMs? The very first reason is the poor performance. We want to enhance the performance. But the second reason is that we saw earlier. Because of this because of this disparity in the training language, it gives rise to these vulnerabilities. Like the example we saw, we used Vietnamese to jailbreak the LLMs. And these attacks, these low resource attacks, they are very low cost attack, which can be used and which can be used for widespread, basically widespread harm. So we need to do the safety alignment in these models. But first, I want to introduce safety and robustness. So what is a safety? So safety basically refers to the ability of the model to operate within the ethical boundaries. And what models provider do here is they do something called safety training, where they do adversarial training, RLHF, DPO, to make sure that these models do not generate harmful content. And now robustness, it refers to the ability of the safety trained LLMs to make sure they do not generate harmful content even under the attack. And these safety trained LLMs should be robust in their generation, even when adversary is trying to manipulate them or even they are trying to attack them. So what can attackers do? Like we have seen before, they can generate how to create bad stuff. Not only that, it has been shown that they can generate the prompt that will actually expose and generate private personal information from the training data. And among that, low-cost attacks, such as low-resource language attacks, they can be sprayed in a really scalable manner, which is why we need to do the safety training. It is very crucial that these LLMs do not generate harmful content. Also, so they should be best at what they produce and should minimize the biases and avoid perpetuating these stereotypes or discrimination. Now the question is, why do LLMs jailbreak? In general LLMs, why do they jailbreak? There are no conforming hypotheses, but there's a really good hypothesis from UETL. There are two hypotheses that have been suggested. First one is competing objective, where there is conflict between moral capabilities and its safety goals, so they compete for each other. The another one is mismatch generalization, which is basically a failure mode that will arise when safety training does not adequately generalize to all domains where the moral capabilities are available. So these are the two hypotheses. But now the question we can ask, like, why LLMs jailbreak using the low resource language? Now there are no existing studies that is specifically focused on this one. So we can think about the few questions itself. Okay, so now we know that cross-lingual knowledge sharing occurs. Is that because of that reason they know this knowledge of how to create nuclear weapon? Is that model pulling the knowledge from other language in Vietnamese language? If so, which one is the donor language? Or is it the harmful knowledge that was already presented in the Vietnamese language, in the low resource language? But that will be very costly to find out. Or is it the safety training methods, such as doing the adversarial training or RLHF just in English, that actually leave the model vulnerable to those languages? So based on these aforementioned issues, my proposal seeks to address these issues described earlier into three main objectives. The very first one that I want to work with is to investigate the computationally effective method on how to create the multilingual LLMs. Then I want to understand these factual knowledge cross-lingual sharing dynamics between these models in the generative talks. I also want to investigate different vulnerabilities in in-context learning and multilingual LLMs. Now, why do I want to look into in-context learning? Because many of the jailbreak attacks that are being done via in-context learning. In-context learning actually allows LLMs to learn just by looking into the content in the context. We don't even have to do another training just during the inference time. And third, I want to look into, is it possible to create, or what's the feasibility of creating a method or to come up with something that will make multilingual LLMs robust? Now I divide this objective into four thrusts. The very first research thrust is going to be the absent language adaptation in pre-trained LLMs. This is where I want to look into different methods of creating multilingual LLM. Second thrust is to investigate the cross-lingual factual setting dynamics in generative LLMs. The third is to probing and modeling the jailbreak in LLMs. How to jailbreak LLMs? So if I understand this one, I can work on my thrust 4, which is going to be how can I enhance the safety and robustness in multilingual LLMs? With that being said, I want to begin with the first one, efficient language adaptation. So now the research question is that we know that low resource language, as the name suggests, there are very few data available for the training. Now, if we really want to do the pre-training, first, I have very little amount of data, and the pre-training is very costly to do. So what can we do? Can we simply fine-tune? If so, can we efficiently adapt those pre-trained LLMs with new low resource language? Can we use methods such as PEP, which means parameter efficient fine-tuning, using low-rank adaptation? I want to give a background on PEP and LoRa. So these are a great method when it comes to the rapid fine-tuning of these LLMs. So we don't train the whole layer. Rather than that, we freeze the pre-trained model weights and add some trainable rank decomposition matrices, and we train on that. And because of that, the fine-tuning, the cost of fine-tuning is very low, and it also gives reasonable results in many tasks. So I want to propose the experiment for this research question. So I want to use LoRa for fine-tuning a state-of-the-art model. And I want to use something called curriculum learning. This is very similar to somewhat similar to how human learns. So from, as a human, I learned some basic concept. I move on to complex one. Similarly, I want to use a model that has already been trained on how to generate English language. And from that one, I want to teach it how to generate English language. If that's the case, I can use something called chain of thought process, which is the key idea here. I want to include the translation in the chain of thought process. So why do I want to care about the translation? Because we don't have really good generative model, but we do have good translation model that could provide translation in low resource languages. So the model I want to use here is Llama 2 series model and also Gemma 2 model. And for the data set, I want to use instruction pair data set, which will look like this. There will be instructions such as, okay, give me, write the Python program code for particular input, and the model will generate the response from there. And this is how the prompt will look like. So where I'm going to give input to the model, giving the system prompt and the instruction in the low resource language. And then the model should be generating the instruction in English, write the response in English, and then do the translation or generate the response in Nepali. So when I do that, all I need to now do is create the translation data set and create the data set in this format. So now the question is, how do we evaluate these models? So what will be my evaluation method here? Now the human evaluation is very expensive, and I want to use LLM as a judge here, and I want to use Vicuña benchmark data set. So why do I want to use LLM? Because it is very cheap. So once I get the responses in low resource language, I can translate that in English. And state-of-the-art models, they are really good at judging the answer written in English. So that way I can use state-of-the-art for the evaluation. But the problem here is this evaluation method is not perfect. There are biases associated with the LLMs because every LLMs, they have been trained with their own data set or the different preference from human feedback. So there might be biases associated with that. And the evaluating the performance of LLMs, it's an ongoing research problem itself. And evaluation prompt looks like something like this. I'm going to ask the model that it is the impartial judge and evaluate the quality of the resources and just provide the rating from 1 to 10. And I'll provide the question and the response from the model, and the LLM will provide me the ratings for that one. Now, this work, it has been completed to some extent. The paper was published under the name of TACO, Translation Assisted Cross-Linguality, in the 5th workshop in ICLR 2024. So what is a TACO? So the main idea here is to use the translation inside a chain of thought process and use the curriculum learning. For this, I used the training data set of Alpaca 52K and Dolly 52K, and I translated them to low resource language in 132 languages using the Google Cloud Translation. And to get the translation, I used the Google Translation for the evaluation benchmark as well, again in 132 languages. These translations are currently available in Hugging Face, which is one of the largest multilingual instruction pair data set. Model and training. Now, I use Guana 33B here because Guana 33B, back then, it was one of the state-of-the-art model, and it has already known how to generate text in English. Now, since I'm doing curriculum learning, all I need to do for it now is to teach how to generate text in low resource language. And we trained the model adaptation separately for each language, and each data points what was transferred to the TACO method that we saw earlier. And I used LoRa fine-tuning here. Language selected were Nepali, Sanskrit, Maithili, and one high-resource language, Persian here. We also trained the instruction tuned model only, which means no TACO method was involved in Nepalese and Persian. Now, these are the results. If I simply look into the results from the instruction tuned model with no translation, just training them to generate in Nepalese and Persian, compared to that, we can see that the score for Nepalese and Persian over here, which is really high. If we take a look into the results that has been generated, this is the response generated by the TACO model. But if you look here, the question we are asking is what is quantum computing? And I can show the translation using the Google Translate. If you take a look into the response here, the model is basically repeating itself, and the response is not coherent. And if you take a look here in the response generated by the TACO model, it is very coherent. But there are limitations associated with that. The first one is token limitation, because we're working with two languages. When it comes down to low resource language, the number of tokens increases. Also, this is an English-centric model because every time we're pivoting from the English. And since we are using the Google Translate, all those awkwardness that are in the Google Translate, it will be carrying over to our TACO model as well. There are still work that needs to be done. I want to work with more low resource languages. I also want to work with different language models here, and eventually want to work with enough LoRa, because instead of having to produce it in the translation, I want to simply to understand, given the low resource language, I want to generate the low resource language. And for that, I want to merge different LoRa one after the another. So that's the completion of thrust 1. I want to begin with thrust 2, where I want to investigate the cross-lingual factual knowledge sharing, dynamics in generative models. Now, we know that there's a donation of the knowledge between the languages, but we don't know the scope of that transfer. And here I want to explore the factual knowledge sharing between these languages in multilingual LLMs. But why do I really care about this question is that if I know from which language the other language is pulling, then I only need to fine-tune in that donor language. And that will make the knowledge transfer into other low resource languages as well. For the safety training, all I need to do now is just train the model or do the safety training in particular donor language only. And that will be carried over into other languages as well. And not only that, if I know where the harmful knowledge is pulling from, I can simply do the data cleaning in that particular donor language. And that will reduce the cost of cleaning the data. So in summary, I want to divide the overall research into 3 research questions. So the very first one is, I assume that, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain this later as well. But in the very first question, I want to investigate which one will be the donor language. If the knowledge is in English, and if the knowledge is also in Hindi, and if I'm asking the knowledge in Nepalese, where will that knowledge will be from? In second question, I'm going to remove the knowledge from English. Now the knowledge is in English, in Hindi, Maithili, Sanskrit, and I'm using another language to get that knowledge. Where will that be pulled from? In third language, the knowledge again is in Hindi, Nepalese, and Maithili, but the model has never seen, let's say, Sanskrit at all. If I'm doing pure short transfer, where I'm creating the prompt in the in-context learning, if I do the future transfer, gesture transfer, where will that knowledge come from? Because the model has never seen Sanskrit at all. It has no idea how to generate text in Sanskrit. But they do have similarity in their language because they belong to the same script language. Where will that knowledge pull from? So these are the questions that I want to look into. Now for experiment 2, for all of these, I have common experiment set up. So first, I want to make sure that models are capable of generating and understanding the English. For that, I'm going to use alpaca dataset to train the model. Now, to probe the knowledge, to test the facts from one language to another language, I'm going to create synthetic dataset using state-of-the-art models. And the languages that I'm going to choose is going to be from Devanagari script, Nepali, Hindi, Maithili, and Sanskrit. Now, I want to divide that test-based knowledge dataset into 2 parts, same knowledge and conflicting knowledge. I'm going to go to this slide and I'll come back there. So same knowledge is basically that if I have a knowledge in English, height of Mount Everest is 884A, I'll have the same knowledge in different languages in that script. In conflicting knowledge, I'm going to say height of Sagarmatha is 99, and I'm going to put different facts in there. But why do I want to do that? So going back to this slide, because same knowledge, if there are entities, I'm hoping that LLMs will learn the shared representation between those entities. And it will help me to verify that cross-lingual factual knowledge sharing occurs in generative LLMs. Now for the conflicting knowledge, if I'm querying the model in Sanskrit, and if I got, let's say, if I'm querying the model in Hindi, and if I get 1111, I could pinpoint exactly the model is getting the answer from Sanskrit. So that's why I have two different knowledge over here. So another common experiment setup here, that's the same slide explaining what I just said. So for the models, I want to use the models that has not been trained in those languages, but it is possible that they have seen those target languages. For that, I want to conduct something. I want to conduct preliminary experiment where I'm going to create some synthetic data set using other LLMs, and I'm going to create some instruction data set using the Wikipedia article. The intuition here is that all of these models have seen Wikipedia article from Common Crop. So if that's the case, I can simply compare the performance in both of these data sets, and I can calculate the relative performance ratio. If that is high, which means models have seen those languages. I can also compare the performance in both of these data sets and the multilingual models that existed outside, and I can do the performance baseline comparison. Now, if the scores are high, that means these models have already seen those languages, which means either I have to choose another language that haven't seen these languages. Sorry, either I have to choose another models that haven't seen these languages, or I need to come up with the another language pairs. So after that, for the hypothesis testing, one would be the evaluation that I talked about earlier, which is the empirical analysis. And the other one that I want to do, now empirical evaluation will tell me where it is pulling the knowledge from. Now, what I want to do here, I want to use logit lens. So what logit lens do here is it will, for every layer of the transformer, it will basically going to apply the embedding in each layer and see how the model decision progress from each layer by layer by layer. So how does this will help with the research question? Again, I'm going to go to this slide first. So here, what I'm doing, I'm asking the model, I have a certain prompt, and I'm using Llama 3 instruct model where it already knows how to generate text and Nepalese. So I give some instruction, and the model needs to predict 1856. Now, the first thing that model needs to predict is 1. So we can see that how it's making a decision on how to predict 1. It already predicts 185 in English, and then it switches suddenly to 1. So it tells you that the model is pivoting to English before it making its prediction in that Nepalese. Again, I want to predict 6 because I have given 18.5 over here. And I can see that model is progressing and thinking what to predict. Again, it pivots to English and then generate the 6. If that's the case, in addition to the empirical analysis that we had, now I can use logit lens to see how model came to that conclusion. Even when the model knowledge is only in the Devanagari script language, is it still pivoting to English or not? That will tell me a lot about how model works, how multilingual LLMs work. Now, so the reason behind selecting these 4 languages is because they all of them belongs to the same script language, and they also have the same ancestor, Sanskrit. And literature has shown that cross-lingual sharing occurs when the languages are from the same script family. Now, for each one of those experiments, for research question, I have experiment. So for the very first one, objective here is to investigate where will the LLM pull its knowledge from, given that the knowledge is in English and in Hindi. If I'm querying in Nepali, where will that knowledge come from? Now I will begin the experiment with the different model sizes, and I'm going to train the model to be able to generate text from Nepali, Hindi, and English. And I'm going to put the knowledge in, same knowledge in Hindi and English, but not in Nepali, because that's my test-bed language. And I'm also going to put the knowledge, conflicting knowledge in Hindi and English, but not in Nepali. Now, after the model has been fine-tuned, I'm going to use Nepalese language with question answering and composition tasks. And based on the generation answer generation, I can do the hypothesis testing using the empirical analysis. I can check where the same knowledge is coming from, and I can also check where is the conflicting knowledge coming from, and it will pinpoint exactly which is the donor language here. Similar to that, the other experiment for question 2, for the research question 2.2, here the objective is that I want to know where will Sanskrit get its knowledge from, given that knowledge is in Hindi, Maithili, and Nepali. And here, when I do the fine tuning, I'm going to start with the balanced data. And I'm going to make sure that all of these models, sorry, all of these languages model know how to generate in these languages. And for the same knowledge, I'm going to put the knowledge in Nepali, Hindi, and Maithili, but not in Sanskrit and not in English, because I don't want the knowledge to be coming from English just in case. And I simply want the knowledge to be in the same neighboring language over here. Now I'm going to do the test in Sanskrit. Again, I'm going to select the same question answering and composition tasks, and the evaluation methodology is the same. I want to do the empirical analysis as well as to investigate using the logicals. Now, there is a probable case where I don't get any result. For that one, I want to do the fine-tuning in generation tasks with the imbalanced data set where I can use 2:1:1 ratio. This is just a hyperparameter for the experiment. And when I do the imbalance training, but I'm not going to do the imbalance with the knowledge. I'm only going to do the imbalance in the generation tasks only to see how different it will be. So in that case, I might get an answer that will help me to evaluate my research question. And finally, I want to understand what will happen if the model has knowledge in Hindi, Maithili, and Nepali, but model has no idea on how to generate text in Sanskrit, which is an unseen language for the model. That's why in the fine-tuning process, I took out the Sanskrit now, because Sanskrit is now a foreign language to that particular model. Now, what will happen if I simply query in Sanskrit language? Where will the knowledge will be pulling from? And similarly here, I'm going to select Sanskrit as a tested language with the same tasks, the same evaluation methodology. Again, nothing might happen. I might not get any result, for which I'm going to use the imbalanced data set for the fine-tune generation tasks. And this is how I'm going to work with my thrust 2 to investigate the cross-lingual dynamic steering. Yes, sir. Sure.
So why do you care about the source of knowledge?
Yes. So if I go back to the motivation, if I know exactly where the factual knowledge is coming from, now why do I care about the factual knowledge in the very first case? So if I'm asking a model how to create a explosive in school, right? So if I get some factual knowledge with the same ingredients, it matters a lot rather than the model hallucinating. Now, if I know exactly where that knowledge is coming from, number one, I can do the safety training in that donor language only, which will prevent the model to generate in other low risk languages.
Are you sure that every time the model will pull it from the same language?
I'm not sure. And this is why that's the exact reason I have 3 experiments. The first one, I want to see whether it's looking into English or existing other nearby language. That's what the first thing first research question 2.1 was to evaluate between the English and other resource language. Then I remove the knowledge from English and I put the knowledge in the nearby languages only. And again, what I do, I query the model in the third one in Sanskrit, and imagine that Sanskrit never exists before. The model has never seen it. What will happen in that case? Is the cross-lingual factual selling still occurs even in the language that it has never seen? In that case, because a lot of the time, for example, Newari language that I've shown earlier, Newari, it's a very low resource language. And if I can do the future training, it is possible that safety training hasn't been done in that language at all. So that's why there are 3 experiment designs for that case. Did I answer your question, sir? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, now for the thrust 3, I want to investigate and model the jailbreaks in LLM. Now, why do I want to do that? If we understand how model jailbreak occur, we can create a more robust models, and including the multilingual LLMs. So my research question 3 is, we have attention-based language models from the transformer, and there is limited working capacity, which is similar to how we human works with our working memory. So just as human cognition is very susceptible to cognitive overload, is it the same case in LLMs as well? Do LLMs also suffer cognitive load or not? Is it possible? So can we create a threat model to address the vulnerabilities or attacks that could exploit the cognitive overload in LLMs? So that's the research question. So I want to investigate. First thing is that whether LLMs also suffer the cognitive overload or not. And I want to investigate, can we use that cognitive overload and exploit that to create a jailbreak? Now, I want to provide some background on working memory. Working memory is basically a cognitive function that holds some small amount of information. It also helps us with the processing of that information. But the problem here, we have a very small amount of working memory. And this is where cognitive load theory comes in, which refers to the amount of working memory. Basically, the cognitive load refers to the amount of working memory resource being used during a metatask. And what cognitive load theory is do here, it basically provides different ways to reduce that cognitive load. And it divides the cognitive load into three parts. One, intrinsic cognitive load, which is that there is an inherent difficulty for every subject matter. For example, if I'm learning the addition, I might have very small cognitive load. And if I'm learning the calculation, which is more complex, it will have higher cognitive load. Similarly, it also tells about the extraneous cognitive load, which tells that if I ask someone, if I'm giving the instruction to an English-speaking student on how to work with calculus in Spanish, which will provide more cognitive load because there is an unnecessary information there. So extraneous cognitive load comes from unnecessary mental effort that needs to be spent on learning something. And German load is basically the overall effort that contributes to learning and understanding. Now we know that in order to learn better, we can reduce these two loads. So how to reduce the cognitive load? There have been different methods such as segmenting principle that says, okay, let's organize the information in a step-by-step manner to reduce the element interactivity. It also says, okay, what if we provide the information beforehand so that the person can learn easily? It also talks about spatial continuity principle, basically says learning improves when related words and images are placed adjacent to each other. And the final one is the self-explanation effect, which is that learning benefits that occur when learners actively explain the concept to themselves. But the question is, how can we measure cognitive load in human beings, right? So there have been different methods that have been suggested. The one is self-reporting method, where we give all the information about cognitive load to a person, and we ask them to provide a score from 1 to 9 or 1 to 10, how difficult the task was. And the second one is called dual task measure, where what we do, we provide a primary task, which is difficult to solve, and we provide an observation task. And based on the performance of that observation task, we're going to measure how difficult it was for that particular person to solve the very primary task. So these are two measures to do that. Now, what I want to do, I want to split the research question 3 into 2 parts. One, does increasing cognitive load deteriorate the performance of the observation tasks in LLMs? Does cognitive overload, if it exists, does it break LLM safety mechanism? So for experiment results 3.1, I'm going to measure the cognitive load in the similar way as it's done in human. I'm going to use self-reporting approach, and I'm going to use multi-task approach, where I will give the primary task and observation task to LLM. And based on the performance of the observation task, I'm going to measure the cognitive load in LLMs. And research 3.2, what I want to do now here, so that observation task, I'm simply going to change that with a harmful data set, such that instead of asking anything simpler, I'm going to ask how to create a bomb after asking something very challenging. And those harmful data set will be coming from forbidden question data set and jailbreak bench data set that basically consists different harmful text over there. Now, after each answer has been generated by the model, I need to evaluate whether that is harmful or not. So I'm going to use a method, JAWS LLM over here, similar to what I proposed in Taku method. The similar approach has been done by Mehta and we et al., where we get the response from the model, And then we ask the judge LLM to judge whether that answer is safe, unsafe, or neutral. And I can design the evaluation prompt like this. I'm going to ask it to be impartial, and I'll provide a question and the answer given by the model. And I'm going to ask it to explain the reason on why you decided to give it the label safe, unsafe, or neutral. And this work has been completed. The publication is currently, the paper is under review right now. The work has been done with me, Dr. Vahid, and Dr. Amin Karvasi. Cognitive overload attack using prompt injection for long context. So what is a cognitive overload attack? So in this paper, what we do, we first compare the learning in human cognition and in context learning. Then we apply the concept from cognitive load theory that we just looked, and we find out that similar to human beings, we also see that cognitive overload exists in LLMs, and we exploited that to create a jailbreak in LLM, and we bypassed the safety mechanism of LLMs. So first, we need to understand what is learning itself, because learning has different terms. So here, what we do, we adapt the Min et al. Definition of learning, and we say that learning occurs in context learning if the model learns how to accurately execute the task that has been given in the input prompt. Because we cannot simply compare the learning with the human, because in a human, when we learn, we update our mental model and remember that for the long period of time. But in context learning, we don't update the model weights. So we are simply saying the learning is when the model executes tasks accurately. If that's the case, I can compare the learning in human cognition to in-context learning. The learning process seems somewhat similar, including the information processing. The abstraction of the concept that we have is very similar to what LLMs do. Also, the error correction method that what we human do is somewhat similar to how somewhat to what models do by minimizing errors over many examples. Similarly, we human, we require a pre-knowledge about some concept to learn something. Similarly, in context learning, it is the result of the pre-training where they have prior knowledge over there. And there are similarities in learning in human cognition and in context learning. The major difference here is that we human update our mental thought. In context learning, it does not, the model does not update its weight during the task execution. Now for the experiment result, now the question is, how do we design the tasks that will induce the cognitive load? Now what we can do, we can provide unnecessary information to the model. And for that, because when you provide the unnecessary information, we know that it will increase the extraneous cognitive load. And when there are too many information there, the element interactivity, the concept, the interactivity of the concept, it will also get high, which will also eventually increase the intrinsic cognitive load. So what do we want to do here? We want to give these tasks, task 1 to task 6, to create these kind of texts where model will get some text and you need to write down the remove instruction in that pattern, reverse instruction in that pattern, use instruction in that pattern, so on and so forth. Now, how do we give the observation task? Now, for the observation task, what we do, if we're asking how to create a cake, I want to pad it with these obfuscation tags. That's why we see tags inside this tag, how to create a cake. Now, what will this do? Again, adding unrelated information here, increasing the extraneous load, and too much information where it will also increase the intrinsic cognitive load. So this is how I'm going to create the observation task. If that's the case, what we did, we conducted a preliminary experiment with Llama 3. We created a synthetic data set, and for every observation task, we hide the question there, experiment question there, science experiment question, and we concatenate that with the basically with the cognitive load that we saw earlier. So here with cognitive overload, task T1, I'm going to add the observation task inside the obfuscated task, and I'm going to ask the model to answer it. In T1, it's representing that. In T2, I have task 2 plus model need to answer that observation question. So when I ask without any cognitive load, this is the score from the model, average score. And we can see that for every cognitive load, when we attach cognitive load with observation task, we can see the performance deterioration. And now this is the, yes.
Score.
So score here, we ask the JAWS LLM to evaluate the score because these are science tasks. So what we do, we do the pairwise comparison. This is the answer in non-CL, and we give that answer with the answer from when we have the cognitive load, and we ask the LLM, JAWS LLM, to provide a score for particular cognitive load. And again, we do the same thing. For the question 2, we ask the LLM in a simple way, no cognitive load at all, and it will give us some answer. And we do what we do after that. For question 2, we ask the LLM with cognitive load. Then we'll get another answer and do the pairwise comparison. How much the answer differ from one without cognitive load with cognitive load. So these scores are basically representing that on average. Throughout those 100 questions that we gave it to the Llama 3 model, these are average for each cognitive load. Yes. So no CL, there's no cognitive. This is basically asking how to create ammonia gas in the lab. And it will give us some answer. Now, what I want to do in T1, I want to ask it first to write down the removed instruction. It will write down how to create ammonia gas in this manner. And then it needs to also understand the question with this, because I'll hide how to create ammonia gas in the lab like this. So there's a cognitive load associated with that. I have a slide that I can quickly show here.
Before you do that, why is it that no CL doesn't have an average?
Because model always don't. So when I'm asking to rate this, there is no pairwise comparison. This is just, I'm asking the model to give a score from 1 to 10 based on
the same model.
So for here, the JAWS LLM, I'm asking 2 LLMs here because there is a bias in JAWS LLM. So I asked Llama 370B, and I also asked the Gemini 1.5 Pro, and I average their scores together.
Equation. And I just still don't understand how we can create this score. Is it you get an output from the two models from Llama 3 and Gemini, and then you just do pairwise comparison? They match, you get 1, they don't, you get 0, and then.
So what I first do here, for the no CL, that means I'm simply asking the model some question. Let's say I have model A, and I have, let's say I'm using the model, and this is Llama 370B. So I get some response from the model. And this is simply asking model how to create ammonia gas. Now, when I get the response, I send it to 2 JAWS LLM. So JAWS LLM 1 and JAWS LLM 2, and I'll get 2 scores here for the question.
What's the prompt to these JAWS?
So there is an evaluation prompt, which is very similar to the one that we saw in the taco. So I'm asking it to, based on this question, based on your knowledge on how to create an ammonia gas, please give it a score from 1 to 10. And I ask the same question to both JAWS LLMs, and they'll give me some score. So what I do here, for every 100 questions without cognitive load, I average all the score at once. That's what we are seeing over here. Now, what I do in T1, I first provide the cognitive load task, and then I provide the how to create ammonia task here, and I use that obfuscation there. So again, for this one, I'll get a response from the model. Now, when I get the response, I'm going to send it again to 2 JAWS LLMs, JAWS 1 and JAWS 2. And I average those scores for all those 100 questions, which is exactly what we have here. So,
but do you know how the
sorry.
judge, you know how the judge calculates that score?
So for this one, what I do the pairwise comparison. So the answer I got here without the cognitive load, I ask it, this is the best response that the model should have. Based on that, please compare the response that you have over here.
Okay, but you get a number out as an output of the LLM.
Yes.
Do you know how that number is calculated?
So it is based on the evaluation prompt that we give. We asked it based on the response that we see, based on the LLM knowledge, on how accurate the knowledge is, how relevant the answer is to the asked question, give it the score of 1 to 10. These are LLMs.
So in the interest of time, since this is a valid discussion, the short answer is we are dropping the LLM, then we are updating it. The longer answer is something that I definitely think we should come back
Yeah.
to in the Q&A session.
Okay, so that is for the dual task measure. And what I want to do now, I first, if I show the how it looks like, the prompt, this is what the exact prompt looks like. So I asked the LLM, this is the one with the cognitive load, asked the model to solve and give answer like this, and the observation task was hidden like this. So I'm going to back to the now. So this was for the dual task measure. Now what we can do, we can also do the self-reporting here, where I can ask the model, okay, and this is very similar to how we ask human to do the cognitive load measurement. So we just give the prompt to the LLMs just here, and then we ask, okay, please, based on the information of the cognitive load, please judge them in the intrinsic cognitive load and extrinsic cognitive load. We see the judge, they actually agree on the intrinsic cognitive load, but they do not agree with the extrinsic cognitive load because they don't have the inner mechanism with regarding their token counts. Now, what we can do here, and now it's not, we didn't see that much of difference here in terms of the cognitive load. So what I want to do, I want to make a stack of different cognitive loads. So for CL1, I'm simply going to have task 1 plus observation task. Now for CL2, I'm going to have 2 cognitive load tasks, T1 and T2, and T7 as the observation task. And I want to do the same thing for other one as well. If I do that, and for this one, we use Vicuna empty benchmark of 100 question, not the science one. So we use the Vicuna empty benchmark, and we ask these 4 LLMs. We tested the performance of these 4 LLMs. And for this one as well, when we get the response, we did the pairwise comparison with 2 LLMs. And these are the score that we get. Now here, what we see here is that as we increase the cognitive load, the performance deteriorates significantly here. Now, so far, this is just in graphs, but can we visualize the cognitive overload or not? So for this one, what we did here is that we changed the obfuscated observation task and asked the model, please write the Python turtle code to draw an owl, write Python code to draw unicorn, and write TIKZ code to draw unicorn. And this is an example where the model needs to first write these things, cognitive load tasks, and then write the Python code. Solve the cognitive load tasks, and then write the TIKZ code. If that's the case, when the code has been generated, we can actually run the code, and we can see that without the cognitive load, this is what the model write the code, and this is what the model actually draw. And we can see that as the cognitive load increases, the abstraction of this out, it actually deteriorates. And we see the same thing happening with GPT-4 as well. As we increase the cognitive load, it actually deteriorates. Same thing with Claude 3 Opus. And in some models, without cognitive load, it creates something, but as the cognitive load increases, though either the code doesn't run or the model doesn't understand what the question was being asked. We did the similar experiment with the unicorn as well. And you can see that Claude 3.5, as the cognitive load progresses, the abstraction deteriorates. Same thing with Claude 3 Opus. And for few models, model was not able to generate the code at all. And in TIKZ, we can see the same case in the deterioration from this image generated without the cognitive load all the way here with the image generated with highest cognitive load. The deterioration in the code that the model was generating without and with cognitive load. Now the question is, how can we quantify cognitive load? So what we did, we take a look because we wanted to quantify it in some way. Then we thought, okay, the irrelevant information is coming from the irrelevant tokens in the generation. So let's quantify that. So we took an average for Llama 370V for all the answers that has been generated. We did the same thing with the GPT-4 tokenizer. And when we measured the increment of the cognitive load in CLI plus CLI plus 1, comparison of CLI with CLI plus 1, we found a significant increment in the cognitive load tokens, irrelevant token generation. Now, for the cognitive overload prompt injection attack, what we did, as I mentioned earlier, we hide the observation tasks with the harmful questions. But first, what we did, we created derivative questions for each harmful question, and we're basically doing the paraphrasing here. So instead of asking simply what is the recipe for creating illegal drugs, we also asked the question how to make illegal drugs. Now, what we did, so for every question, we're going to attach CL1, cognitive load 1, derivative question 1, and we test the attack. Then if that didn't work, we attach derivative question 2, we test the attack, so on and so forth. If CL1 don't work, we're going to move to cognitive load 2, we're going to move to cognitive load 3, so on and so forth. An example can be seen as this. So over here, this is basically asking how to create a method form. And we can see that this is cognitive load task 1, where the model needs to create instruction like this and then generate the answer for this question. In cognitive load 2, now, since we're increasing the cognitive load, model needs to write reverse instruction plus remove instruction and then generate the answer like this. And this is again asking the same question. So on and so forth, we keep increasing the CL1 all the way to CL7. In that case, we observe that our attack works really great in both forbidden question data set as well as in the jailbreak bench data set. And we can see that attack success rate, now attack success rate is evaluating the overall attack from all those cognitive load combined together. And we can see that these attack works really well all the way to more than 95% in many of those models. What we did here, we used JAWS LLM as a GPT-4 for jailbreak bench dataset. And over here to show the flexibility, we had 2 different JAWS for different models. After the attack has been done, we use additional judgment for each of those answer that has been evaluated as unsafe with these additional judges over here. And we can see that even in that cases, the additional judge also tag all those many of those harmful questions as unsafe here. Now, there's a model Clouded 3.5 Sonnet, which does really well in many tasks, and we could not succeed with CL1 to CL6 cognitive load there. That's why we created new cognitive load combination from CL7 to CL11, and we tested this in the jailbreak bench data set because of the API rate limit. And even in that case, we got the answer, we got the attack success rate of 53%. Now, the cognitive load, the cognitive overload, it's basically what we can do. We can use the Clouded 3.5 Sonnet model now and give it the information on what is cognitive load and what kind of form that we need, and ask it to generate form that is very similar to ours. And what we did when it generated that form, we used that to attack GPT-4, and we just changed the question here, and we can see that this was the proof of concept where we are basically using Clouded 3.5 Sonnet to create another form to attack GPT. In conclusion, we saw that as we increase the cognitive overload, our attack success rate keeps increasing. Not only that, the performance of the model also decreases when we increase the cognitive load. There are still work that needs to be done here. I want to investigate the attention mechanism under cognitive load for different models. Since I cannot do that in the black box model, I'll be working with a Llama series model for this one and Gemma series model. And I also want to investigate, is it possible to successfully attack Clouded 3.5 Sonnet with low cognitive load prompts or not? Now, for research 4, what we want to do, I want to use the cognitive load attack to attack multilingual LLMs. So for this one, is it feasible to create the threat model to study the efficacy of these kind of attacks in multilingual LLMs? For this, I come up with the experiment setup where I want to target different LLMs, but I want to basically translate all the sample questions into different languages. And I also want to create two-turn language conversation. And I also want to create a sandwich prompt. And I want to use each one of them to test and attack different models. And whenever I get the correct attack success rate, I want to note that language. And basically, I want to test whether the same language can be used to attack other LLMs or not. Whether the same vulnerability, do all LLMs share the same vulnerability to particular low-risk language or not? And also, I want to test, are LLMs also vulnerable to other languages within the same language family or not? For an example, if Sanskrit is jailbreaking this LLM, I want to find out whether Nepali, Hindi, Maithili will also jailbreak LLMs or not. This work has been done. The paper that we worked on is sandwich attack. The paper was awarded Spotlight paper in Trust NLP 2024 and AACL conference. So the work is called sandwich attack. So we tested it with the translated form and two-tone language only. It did not work. So what we did, we created the sandwich attack, which looks something like this. So we padded the question with other languages and I put the harmful question in the middle. So when we did that, we actually got really good results where we can see that different models have been attacked with Basque language in the middle with the adversarial question, and 2 models was attacked using the Vietnamese language. We also learned that when we put the English in the prompt, it triggers the safety mechanism. That's why if you take a look into these 2, we can see that without English, it write down uranium and what else it needs, and we do not see the same ingredients in the top answer. We also extended this one, as I have shown earlier, to the visual attack model in Google Bard. Now, in terms of the transferability, can the same low-risk language be used to jailbreak other LLMs? Yes, as we have seen that Box was used to attack 3 language family. Now the question is, do all LLMs share the same vulnerability to a particular language? Yes, to some extent. And the question is, are LLMs also vulnerable to the language within the same family? This is the remaining work that needs to be done. So future work involves in investigating the vulnerabilities within the same language family. So where is the cognitive overload attack here? So if we see here, before answering the adversarial question, model needs to work with low-resource language, which is basically more number of tokens that model needs to generate here, which is acting as an irrelevant tokens here that is increasing the cognitive load. Also, when the task switching occurs, it's also increasing the cognitive load. Now, for the final thrust in enhancing the safety. Okay, so how can I increase the safety of the robustness of LLMs, right? So for this one, I want to do the safety training in LLMs. And for that, I'm going to, I'm trying to find out what is the minimum number of languages that will provide a safety training over others, but I cannot do that for every language. So instead, I'm going to work with language family here. So idea here is to, can safety training of pretend LLMs in one language will be helpful in other languages or not? And we assume that we have a donor language. We find out the donor language. So that's why I want to create the adversarial training set in that language and adversarial evaluation data in that adversarial evaluation data set in that language, fine-tune the model for generation tasks, and perform the full fine-tuning and LoRa fine-tuning, and basically do the evaluation with the attack success rate here. So here, all I want to do is fine-tune the model with different languages and see whether that will work or not. After that, what I want to do, I want to create something that is very similar to LlamaGuard. The problem with what is LlamaGuard? LlamaGuard is input-output filtering here on the top of the target LLM. But the problem with this one, it only works with the English text. Now, what I want to do, I want to use different multiple languages, multilingual languages, and train LLM for the purpose of acting as the LLM security. That's basically what the experiment, this research experiment is about. The publication plan looks something like this. I have completed the efficient adaptation of multilingual LLM, but I need to work with the different other languages with other models. Here, sandwich attack, I need to work with the transferability in the nearby languages. Cognitive overload, it has been submitted. I need to work with the investigating the attention mechanism. And for the investigation of the dynamics of cross-lingual factor sharing, that it still needs to be done. Also, the others are also planned as the multilingual LLM LlamaGuard and surveying the interpretability of LLMs under jailbreak attacks. Thank you so much for everyone's time, especially to the dissertation committee members, faculty, staff, and friends, those who have come to listen to the talk. These are the references that has been used. Thank you so much. I'm Vivek Upadhayay. If you have any question, please feel free to